Welcome to Pretense of Justice News Update. We keep our pulse on legal issues. We are compassionate, informative, and driven. We advocate justice for all. We are Pretense of Justice. Let the justice begin. Welcome to Pretense of Justice News Update. Let's get into today's update. Today's article is from the Marshall Project, and the title of the article is The Language Project. Reporters and editors have long believed that terms such as inmate, felon, and offender are clear, succinct, and neutral. But a vocal segment of people affected by the criminal justice system argue that these words and any other words that define human beings by their crimes and punishment are dehumanizing. The Marshall Project occupies a unique space in criminal justice reporting. We are not an advocacy organization, but we are committed to sustaining a sense of national urgency about the U.S. criminal justice system. As a result, fellow journalists often ask us about our style and standards around the language of criminal justice, and activists we meet frequently confront us about our usage of words such as inmate. The Marshall Project began addressing this issue in 2015, our second year of existence, but we did not make a decision to change our style guide. Since then, through our deepening engagement with formerly and currently incarcerated people, we have realized the urgency of examining and articulating the language we use. The Language Project serves three purposes. First, through a series of powerful pieces by and about people with intimate experience with incarceration, we show the human impact of the words we choose. Second, our guide, what words we use and avoid when covering people in incarceration, makes public our decision to avoid labels such as inmate in favor of language that follows the logic of persons first language. Third, we provide alternatives to the labels. At its heart, journalism is a discipline of clarity. The Language Project is our attempt to set the record straight. Okay, so they have I Am Not Your Inmate by Lawrence Bartley. Okay, so let's take a look at I Am Not Your Inmate by Lawrence Bartley. I Am Not Your Inmate by Lawrence Bartley. I didn't always detest this term, but hearing officers use it as an insult reminded me to call incarcerated people, including myself, by our names. Stop talking to me like I am some blanket inmate. I overheard my prison employer screaming in the phone receiver. He was replaying an encounter with another staff member to his friend and colleague. I held one of the better jobs at Sing Sing Prison, even though it didn't pay much more than lint and a button. My employer was cool, always treated me like a human being, but to hear him so vehemently oppose being treated like an inmate deepened my disgust at the word and my status as an incarcerated person. I didn't always detest that word. As life inside prison became my norm, I picked it up. Guards called us inmates, and we called each other the same. Guys like me, who wore brand new green uniforms denoting our recent entry into the system, didn't think twice about referring to ourselves as inmates. The veterans with the faded green uniforms were either more politically conscious in that they called themselves prisoners or deeply identified with the 1970s persona of a convict. I didn't develop a thoughtful position on these labels until years later when I was elected chairman of the Inmate Liaison Committee. The ILC is like a union for incarcerated people. It was my job to bring the prison population's concerns to the administration and vice versa. I would collect people's opinions on an issue, then make decisions that benefited the majority, like replacing helmets with off-brand mayonnaise in the commissary because the generic kind gave you more for your money. My work with the ILC opened my eyes to the needs and desires of people I both liked and disliked, and it taught me to care about my fellow incarcerated people in a collective sense. Some people weren't happy with my representation, but most were. The goal was to do what was best for everyone, even if they themselves didn't realize it. I developed the same rationale with the words we use to refer to one another. Guards, mostly white, tended to use the word inmate with implicit superiority. It didn't matter that we knew we were in prison. No one wanted to internalize inferiority. And the majority of the population were people of color. Adding racism to the mix made the word even more suspect. It almost felt like the N-word. Words like inmate, prisoners, convicts, felon, and offender are like brands. They reduce human beings to their crimes in cages. Talking to people of all races in my New York State prison, I learned that most preferred prisoner. To us, it meant that we didn't want to be caged, we thought freely, and we were prepared to stand up for what we believed in. I admit this can be confusing because terminology is regional. In Mississippi, for instance, politically conscious people refer to themselves as convicts, says Sharon Edwards, who is incarcerated at Chickasaw County Regional Facility. In Missouri, incarcerated people call themselves inmates or offenders, according to Stacy Lynn Powell of Chillicothe Correctional Center. Jonathan Gittens, who was an orientation facilitator in New York prisons before his release, told new arrivals a story to help them understand why incarcerated people is the most expansive term. He recently shared that lesson with me. There were 3 men on a mess hall line. One called himself a convict based on his lifestyle. He knew what he was doing when he participated in his crime, and needless to say, he was convicted. Another man called himself a prisoner because of his political views. He went to trial and was convicted, but he didn't consider himself a convict. He looked for every possible loophole in the justice system as he fought for his freedom on appeal. The third called himself an inmate. He was convicted and sentenced to prison. All he was interested in was hanging out in the yard, playing cards, and watching TV, and he had frequent access to drugs and pornography books. A fourth person, who was new to it all, entered the conversation and asked, "What's the best way to get the most out of prison?" The convict said, "Learn how to commit new and better crimes." The prisoner said, "Work to right the wrongs of the system." And the inmate said, "Just seek out a good time." The newcomer asked, "Is there anything you three can agree on?" All three said, "Yes, we are incarcerated people." I was struck by the simplicity of the three explanations, but my biggest takeaway was the people portion of the commonality. Everyone, whether they are in prison or not, is a person. Words like inmate, prisoner, convict, felon, and offender are like brands. They reduce human beings to their crimes and cages. I believe in calling people by their names. If I'm associating someone with prison, I use incarcerated person or person in prison. If someone is in jail, I call them detained person or person in jail, but incarcerated person can work here too. I understand these phrases can be repetitive and clunky for writers, but we have a responsibility to develop ways to describe people that don't automatically stigmatize them. Stigmas tend to use even the kindest among us as their unwitting weapons. I had a taste of this seemingly benign dehumanization when I visited the prison 11 months after I was released. I felt a chill when the gate closed behind me, but my uneasiness was quickly erased by my excitement to see the fellas. I made a pit stop at the restroom. One door was for incarcerated people, another was for civilians and guards. I took a step towards the incarcerated bathroom out of habit, but the guard on duty stopped me, smiled, and said, "You can go into the civilian bathroom because you are a person now." I don't think she was trying to be mean. I think her words were a result of conditioning rather than ill intent. But her comment hurt me because I was as much a person when I was incarcerated as I am now. It also meant that as long as my friends remained in her care, they will never be human beings to someone with control over their lives. So this particular article, this was still off of the Marshall Project, is "I Am Not Your Inmate." And this is by Lawrence Bartley. And just a little bit insight into him. They write, Lawrence Bartley is the founder and director of News Inside, the print publication of the Marshall Project, which is distributed in hundreds of prisons and jails throughout the United States. News Inside is the recipient of the 2020 Izzy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Independent Media. He is also an accomplished public speaker and has provided multimedia content for CNN, PBS, NBC, Nightly News, MSNBC, and more. So thank you for listening to our update. And if you are not subscribed to us, I highly recommend that you subscribe. Also, like and share. And if you would also like to help our nonprofit organization, HOT, you can do so in two ways. One way is by purchasing merchandise. All of proceeds go to the organization, which is designed to help. And see, now I have to rethink. Just by this article, now I have to rethink what I say. All proceeds are going to formerly incarcerated persons. So you can either purchase merchandise or you can also donate. And don't forget that Dr. Carmen Johnson, she is coming out with her book actually next month, but she is doing pre-orders for Pretense of Justice. I will also put that link in the description. So I want to thank you all for your support on Pretense of Justice News Update. I hope you have a wonderful day. Peace and love.